All right. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for coming to the 9th episode, episode number 9 of Black Coffee and Crime. Today, I do have a guest host who is on location, and the location is dead to the bed. And that guest host is Brandy Wingate, who happens to be my cousin. So you see her picture there. So yes, she is coming to us on location. So she's going to be our guest host tonight. We're going to talk a little bit about what the hell we found on Al Gore's internet this week. Also, the main story is the story of the Briley Brothers. Last week, we talked about Ray Dandridge and Ricky Gray out of in their crime spree in Richmond, Virginia in 2005-2006. We're going to stay in Richmond, but this crime spree with the Briley Brothers was in 1979. So get ready for that. And as always, we start with the church announcements. Do want to warn you, part of the announcements that the story that we have for the Briley Brothers is fairly gruesome. So speaking of sexual assault, gruesome murder, and the murder of a child. So if that is triggering in any way, please be advised. Again, these are our opinions, Brandy's opinion included. So if you have any comments or anything that we missed, please put that in the comment section in Facebook and in Instagram, and we will answer. Always be respectful to us and to your other listeners and viewers. Please mind the ushers. Now, those are the announcements as follows. Anything you want to add, any prayers or anything, Brandy, before we start?
Oh, yeah, I'm ill and infirm, sick and shut in list. So just keep me in your prayers.
Amen and amen again. All right, those are the announcements as follows. Please govern yourselves accordingly. Now, of course, there is always, during this pandemic season, a lot of stuff going on Al Gore's internet. However, on the 18th of August, something hit the news in one single article out of St. Louis, Missouri. And if you are familiar with the show on OWN, welcome to Sweetie Pies, and you know exactly what we're talking about. James Timothy Norman, the guy with the mohawk.
Tim Hips Norman.
Yes. Tim Hips Norman, the son of Miss Robbie, was arrested yesterday on a federal indictment for murder for hire. Now, if you remember, in 2016, his nephew, Andre Montgomery, was gunned down and nobody knew what happened. Well, on the 18th, on Tuesday, we found out what happened. Apparently, Tim put a $450,000 life insurance policy on Andre and then hired someone for about, what was it, like $9,000?
Yep, something like that.
To murder him so that he would collect the insurance money. Y'all.
The crazy thing is that he took it out 2 years previously. So that was probably 2014 that he took that out. So I'm guessing he had moved with Miss Robbie, his grandmother, because he was living in Texas and he wasn't doing too well. And his father, which is Tim Hips Norman's older brother, had been murdered himself. So he moved with his grandmother, Andre did, to get him on a right track, a new area to get him out of trouble. So I'm thinking, I know when he first got there, he hadn't graduated from high school yet. I did watch the show, but I can't remember how long he was there with his grandmother before his murder.
Well, I remember on the show, one of her things was she had to get him graduated, and there was the graduation ceremony, that they did air on the show. So he did graduate while they were airing the show, while they were filming, and so that was a huge accomplishment. But here's the thing. This is his uncle. Andre was a child of Tim Hips' older brother, who, like you said, died of gun violence himself. And so for 2 years, you were plotting against your nephew. And you sat there during the reunion show that we watched the clip last night, and I'll put that clip on Facebook. the clip on the reunion show when Kim Whitfield is asking Miss Robbie about when Andre was murdered. How does she feel? She's asking the family. And of course, hindsight being 2020, knowing what we know now after this arrest, you see some very suspicious looks on Tim's face. He doesn't look at his mom when
No
they start
emotion.
talking about when they start talking about Andre, he looks away. He doesn't look at the camera. You know, probably when that aired, maybe people were thinking, oh, you know, he's grieving. But now, you know that he sat there the whole time that he knew that he did that.
A mess. Just a thick mess.
Yeah, it's horrible that you sat there. You had the nerve and the audacity to sit there in your mother's face while her heart is breaking. Your aunt.
Everyone was crying. Everyone was falling out. And he just sitting there, me and Charles, we the only ones left. I mean, whose fault is that? Now we know
why they were the only ones left.
The thing on the show is when Andre came, Miss Robbie was doing her will or whatever and was talking about. So maybe that might have been a motive. Maybe he didn't want to share in whatever was going to be passed down from Miss Robbie.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe jealous. I don't even know what could possibly make you kill your nephew for $150,000 that you didn't even get.
Yeah, he didn't get the money because he wasn't able to produce the proper documents to the insurance company to claim it. So you did that and you still didn't get the money. Miss Robbie did sue him for opening restaurants with the Sweetie Pie's name when she didn't want him to do that. So he was really overextending himself for quite a while, trying to open these restaurants in different locations. One of the theories that we talked about last night was that maybe he targeted Andre because Andre had been troubled before, and that would be, you know, his death or his murder wouldn't be as questionable as if, you know, if Tim did something to Miss Robbie. But that was, yeah. So he hired a stripper who probably hired someone else to do
Ellis, I think is her name.
Yeah, Tamika Ellis.
She out of Memphis, I think.
Let me see here. This is a CNN article. Yes. So she
out of Memphis.
They were communicating via like burner phone and everything. So yes, Tim is being brought up on federal charges for conspiracy and to commit murder and murder for hire. Now I will also post something that Miss Renee Brown posted on Facebook, and y'all, if I tell you this is the best read I have ever seen in my whole life, and she says, I will read this in part. She says, "Dear Big Mama Tim, she said, all that money and you couldn't get the correct BBL surgery to fix your grandmotherly ass shape. I hate everything about you, from the teacup ears all the way down to the crooked, flat, sloop-footed, rebellious ass feet. Feet don't know which way to turn." She says, "Now let me get these childbearing hips of yours. Hips spreading wider than COVID-19. She said, "You shaped like the north, south, east, and west. Body longer and wider than yesterday, today, and tomorrow." So I would post that's just part of it. And one of the comments to that read was that they said he is wider than the last 72 hours. I hollered.
Oh my gosh. He is pretty wide though.
So even funnier than her read is some of the comments. I will post that. She's really angry. I don't know who Renee Brown is, but she's a treasure and she must be protected at all costs. So I will post that on Facebook as well. Now, there's a lot of this stuff going on the internet, and I'm quite sure I will be posting that too on Facebook during the next coming week. Now let's get to the Briley Brothers. Now, Brandy, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Briley Brothers. Had you heard of them before?
right off the name, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure.
Okay, so anytime you have questions about the craziness that's about to happen or you're about to hear about, just jump in.
Okay.
Just jump in. Okay, so staying in Richmond. Okay, so Richmond, Virginia, of course, has little enclaves and neighborhoods, and one of the neighborhoods is Highland Park. Highland Park is kind of a working middle class neighborhood. Nice house, nice row houses, you know, things put together. And there was a couple there, James and Bertha Briley, and they had 3 sons. They were both upstanding members of the community. Mr. Briley worked, I believe, at a paper mill or something like that. Mrs. Briley worked for like the school district. So she was very well known, very nice people, not the type of people that you think that would raise these psychopaths. So they have these 3 sons who are very intelligent. The first one, his name is Linwood Earl, born March of 1954.
That's a name right there.
Linwood Earl, yes.
Yeah.
And then James Jr., who was born in 1956, and their baby Anthony, born in 1958. So they're kind of stair-stepped. Again, very intelligent boys, no indications that they would turn out this way, that this would happen. However, they did have a fascination with like poisonous and dangerous animals, like tarantulas, snakes, all kinds of stuff like that. And they let them have those things.
That was first problem right there.
So they weren't restricted in any way. However, they did become unruly. They were known as bullies in their neighborhood and at school. Got so bad that Miss Bertha left. She left her husband because she could not take these kids' behavior no more. And
a black woman with all them bugs and such in her home.
And they were just unruly. I mean, so much so that Mr. Briley would padlock himself in his own bedroom, in his own house at night, because he was afraid of what they would do to him. Now, he was actually the only one that the boys respected and were scared of, but he was scared of them. Now, I'm going to tell you why he's scared of them. When Linwood was 16 years old in 1971, 1971 at 16, he took a rifle. Why does he have a rifle when he's 16 in the city? I don't know.
Right.
But he took a rifle and shot his neighbor. Now, Orlean Christian was outside minding her own self business, and she was hanging clothes out on the line. And he shot her like right here, right? So he shoots her. She dies almost immediately. So he's crack shot.
Orlean Christian,
his neighbor. She was 57. So she dies. People see her. They call the ambulance. They call the police. They take her in. They think she died of natural causes. They don't question it. No problem. Well, the neighbors some of her family members are like, well, we saw blood. So they go and they do the autopsy. They still think it's natural causes, but the family is like, no, we saw blood. Something's wrong. They do a second look. That's when they found the bullet.
Was this after she was in the or down to the casket?
Down to morgue.
Oh, okay. She hadn't made it.
She hadn't made it to
the funeral home yet.
She hadn't made it to Tillman. Tillman hadn't picked her up yet. And if y'all not from my hometown of Riverside, California, y'all know about Tillman, but we know about Tillman. So Tillman hadn't picked her up yet. And so they look. The police, based on where she was shot and how she fell on the ground, they knew exactly where that shot had come from, and it had come from Linwood's bedroom. So he's arrested at 16 and convicted, and they give him 1 year in reform school.
Wow.
But this is what he says. He has no remorse. He doesn't have any expression when they arrest him. This is what he says. I heard that she had a heart problem. She would have died anyway. That was his reason.
Wow. So he was just playing target practice with Miss
Orlean.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, she would have died anyway. And that was it. That was all he said. Now, the next brother, James Jr., he followed right in his brother's footsteps. At 16, he robbed a store, and while in pursuit from the police, he turns around and shoots the officer. So he's also convicted of robbery and attempted murder of a police officer. He probably gets 1 year, 2 years in prison at, well, reform school as well. So they seem to be okay for a while. I wouldn't say okay, but they weren't like arrested after this. But in the spring of 1979, they unleashed all hell in Richmond. These are the crimes as follows. Starting March 2nd of 1979, the three brothers plus a 16-year-old named Duncan Meekins. He was a friend of theirs. They're all together. So they fake car trouble. And they go to this couple's door, William and Virginia Butcher. And they ask them if they have AAA. So being the nice people that they are, they're like, yeah, hold on a minute. They close the door. They open the door back up, Mr. Butcher does, and he's going to give them the card. When he does, they rush through the door. They tie them up, beat them up a little bit, tie them up, pour kerosene all over their bodies and throughout the house. As they go through and ransack and rob them, they pour kerosene, then they light it on fire. Duncan was in charge of tying the couple up, but he didn't tie the ropes tight enough, thank God. So Mr. Butcher was able to untie he and his wife, and they are the only survivors of this rampage.
How many people were in the house?
2, an older couple.
Oh, okay.
That was March 2nd. March 21st, they attack a gentleman called by the name of Michael McDuffie. Home invasion, and then they shoot him. April 9th, Mary McGowan, 76. She's babysitting. They follow her home from her babysitting job, break into her home, rush into her home, sexually assault her, and they shoot her in the head. She initially survives her injuries, then she goes into a coma and she dies a couple of days later. So this is incident number 3 within the span of about 30 days. Then they go through a cooling off period for a couple months, and then July 4th, Linwood spotted a teenager by the name of Christopher Phillips, who's 17, by his car. He assumes that Christopher is kind of casing the joint, looking for his car, looking through his gun, is going to look through his car to steal it. They drag him into an alley, and they drop a cinder block on his head, and he dies.
Mercy.
Now, the thing about this is that the cops are investigating these cases, but because they're so random and they don't fit any sort of pathology, they can't connect them.
How far apart were they? Were they like on a certain route, or were they just sporadic type?
They are random and sporadic. They have no plan. They pick their victims at random. It's just, we saw them, she's walking down the street, we're passing, and they get them.
So this is not like in their hometown or nothing. This is just, they just out wilding.
They're just wilding in Richmond.
Okay.
Richmond, Virginia. So they are not going outside of Richmond. They are staying within Richmond in various neighborhoods. Okay, so that was July 4th. Now, September 4th, again, a couple months between crimes. September 4th, they are out cruising, the 4 of them, and they kidnap a radio disc jockey, popular radio disc jockey. Now, Johnny G. Gallagher was a disc jockey on a popular radio station and a band leader. So he's at a club that night, and he's with his band. Now, this is how quick and how random these crimes are. He's with his band. He goes outside for a cigarette break. They kidnap him. They stuff him in the trunk of his Lincoln Continental because they're thinking it's a white guy. He got some flashy stuff on. They're going to rob him. They put him in the trunk of the car. They drive him to, there's like a paper mill on an abandoned paper mill on an island in the James River. So they drive over the bridge to the island. Let's see here. They stuff him in the trunk of the car and they shoot him. Okay. Johnny G is not found for about 2 days. He's in the river, shot in the head. They only get a few dollars, his car radio, and a turquoise ring.
So it's not even about the items. It's just
it's just
the adrenaline.
They don't even know what the people have, really. They're just doing it. They don't, they're not doing any sort of planning.
It's the outing with brothers.
Right. They're not, there's no planning. There's no watching these people ahead of time. It's just completely opportunistic. Linwood is the most intelligent of all three of them. From the articles that I've read and the documentaries that I've watched, he wasn't like tested, for any psychological issues at all.
Linwood is the one that shot the lady in the side?
Right, the oldest brother.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it seems like Linwood is the ringleader and the most intelligent and the most psychotic, and then James is the next one, and then Anthony just kind of does what his brothers do. So it's kind of but they're all, something's wrong with all of them, but Linwood is the thing. Like, so it's kind of like, I don't know what they call it in the medical world or psychological world, but basically they just do whatever Linwood wants them to do, whatever he suggests, but they still have free will to do it or not. So they're all inclined to do,
I mean, it's an outing. It's a social situation.
It's a bonding. It's like they bond over
brothers.
What they're doing.
A sick bonding, but bonding nonetheless.
Right. And out of all the serial killers and criminals that I have been exposed to, I don't know if there's any other families, actually blood-related families that kill like this. I'm quite sure there are that I haven't read about.
Well, there was that one family in the Wild West that would stop the people as they were coming into town, and still, I mean, the whole family was involved with that. I can't remember their names, but it was mama, daddy, brother, sister, everybody. But I can't remember their name right now. But there was a whole family thing, and they had like all kind of bodies in the backyard.
Was this in Kansas or something? It's like a house. Yeah, I'll find that. Yeah,
20-something crazy bodies, like everybody coming in town.
Yes, and it was like they were like axe murderers or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They would invite him in for dinner, and then all of a sudden, off with your head, and then bury him in the back.
Right. But in this modern era of serial killers, because we didn't even know that there was not even a term of serial killer prior to the 1970s. But just a family that does this. I mean, there's been serial killer pairs like Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole. And Otis Toole is the guy who is credited with murdering Adam Walsh. So he admitted to killing Adam Walsh, the America's Most Wanted guy's son. So they do kill Johnny G. Now, I remember I talked about that turquoise ring that they stole. I'll bring that back up because that's going to be the linchpin for them. Now, on September 30th, they encounter Mary Wilfong. They follow her home from work. She's a nurse. They assault her sexually, and then she's bludgeoned to death with a baseball bat. October 5th, Blanche Page, who's 79, and Charles Garner, who's 59. Blanche actually lived in a couple streets over from the Briley's home on 4th Street in Highland Park. So
they knew her.
They didn't know her, but she lived in their neighborhood.
Oh.
Charles was actually a boarder of her, so he lived there. He was like a tenant. So they went into the home. They beat Charles to death with the baseball bat. Then they go upstairs, sexually assault Blanche while she's asleep. And then they also bludgeon her to death. The investigators said that this was one of the most brutal murders that they had ever encountered. So far they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 murders. Mm-mm. And this last one on October 19th is especially brutal. On October 19th, they go over to a friend's house. His name is Harvey Wilkerson. Now, they had grown up with Harvey. Harvey, like the Brileys, was fascinated with reptiles, so he had snakes and things in his house, and so that was something that they, bonded and were familiar with. But he also knew of their reputation. So on the 19th, the night of the 19th, Wilkerson sees Duncan Meekins walking up the street towards his apartment. So he knows if Meekins is coming, the Brileys are not too far behind. So he's frightened, of course. So he locks his door because his pregnant wife, who's 8 months pregnant, and his son is also in the apartment. But he locks the door, but he's still scared because he knows the Brileys. So he's scared, like, if he doesn't let them in, he's scared about what they're going to do. So they knock and he lets them in.
Oh, Lord Jesus, help us all.
So he lets them in, and they force their way into the house.
My thing is, if they're going to force their way in anyway, I'm not inviting you to force your way.
But
you just don't have to force your way in.
But here's the thing. He's thinking, like, he's scared of them, like, because he knows the Brileys. And he's like, why are y'all coming? But at the same time, it's like, if they know he's home and they don't, it's kind of a catch-22. Like, do I let them in and just kind of, shoot the breeze with them and be like, hey, what's up? I'm just chilling with the fam. Or do I try to keep them out and then they force their way in? So it was a lose-lose situation. So
I would have went with you just going to have to force your way in.
Yeah, that depends if you knew the Brileys. Because he knew them. So he knew their reputation. He knew what they were doing. You know what I mean? And it's like, I don't want them to, to think that I'm an enemy because, so I don't think Harvey would have anticipated them doing what they did. So they go into the house and they tie them up, gag them with duct tape. Then Linwood sexually assaults Judy, who's 23 and 8 months pregnant, in front of Harvey Sr. and also their 5-year-old son. So they didn't even bother to kill them first. Then Duncan Meekins, the 16-year-old, also continually participates in the sexual assault. They go through the house, they rob and ransack the home. Duncan is charged with shooting Harvey Wilkerson. So he puts a pillow over him and then he shoots him because he knows him. And you remember, Duncan Meekins is 16, so he's really just kind of following along with this thrill ride that they're going through. James Jr. then kills Judy, and then Anthony murders little Harvey, the little boy. And then they leave. So they do this to strangers, but then also someone that they've known and gone to school with, someone that they see all the time. So
it's they probably deal with all the time, because if the guy loved reptiles and stuff, and here they are with all their stuff, it's probably somebody that, hey man, you pass down the street, let me see your this or that. I'm sure they had probably been over there.
Absolutely. They went to school with Harvey.
Yeah.
So in the neighborhood. So this wasn't someone who was strange to them. This wasn't someone that they had any animosity or any beef with. This was just an opportunity. Like tonight, we don't have any victims tonight. We're just gonna go over to Harvey's house. And so that was the thing. Like, he wouldn't have known that they were going to do that to him, but he was still scared of them. I don't know if you've ever met someone that you just scared of, even though they've never really done anything to you, but you kind of know their reputation and you're frightened of them. That's the way they were. And unfortunately, he had the wrong friends, because they did that to him, his wife, and his little boy, and of course the unborn child as well. So that night, the cops in the area were kind of, they were watching the Brileys. They just kind of had a sneaking suspicion that they were guilty of some of these crimes, but they didn't have any evidence. They didn't leave anything behind to say that the Brileys actually did this. So the night of the 19th, when they went into the Wilkerson's home, there were police officers close in the area, and they did hear the gunshots, but they weren't able to find out where those gunshots came from. And so they weren't able to, and then they did see the Brileys in the area as well, but they were still like, well, we don't see anything. Nothing, you know, there's nothing out of place except we just heard these gunshots. Well, someone calls the police a couple of days later to do a welfare check on the Wilkersons. That's when they found them 3 days later. The Wilkersons also had 2 Doberman puppies. So the puppies were just walking all over the house in the blood. They also let their snakes go in the room, in the house. And they did have some poisonous snakes. So they let the snakes go. So crime scene had to get the animal control in there to get those animals out. Then crime scene was able to go in. But because it had been 3 days and the puppies and the snakes were in the house, the evidence that they were able to collect, most of it was absolutely useless.
Contaminated.
So this is what happened though. Once they started investigating and they found out that the Wilkersons were dead, they started putting some things, they started connecting the dots. They're like, hey, we did see, or the Brileys were spotted in this area on that night. So they were immediately prime suspects. They put a warrant out for them. So when they put the warrant out for them, they knew exactly where to go start looking for the Brileys. Well, Linwood, Duncan, and then James Sr. were in the car, supposedly going to the police station when they found out about the warrant. Linwood had a police scanner in his car, so he knew the police were behind him. So when the police would say, hey, they're on 4th and whatever, Linwood would take another direction. So he's leading them on a wild goose chase all day long. And the police don't know why. So finally they get them, stop the car, they arrest and they found the scanner. Well, Anthony and James are still on the run, but then they end up turning themselves into the police station. So within about 3 or 4 days after the murder of the Wilkersons, which was their final murder, they were all in custody. But they had almost no evidence that they committed anything. So one thing that they did have was, remember the ring that they stole from Johnny Gallagher, the turquoise ring? Linwood was still wearing that ring when he was arrested. And one of the arresting officers was a friend of Johnny Gallagher. So he knew that ring. He recognized that ring immediately. So he knew that the Brileys had killed him. So that was one. The other thing was they separated Duncan away from the Brileys because he was the youngest one and the weakest link. They put pressure on Duncan and basically said, we'll keep you from the chair if you tell us what happened. He sang like a canary to keep himself out of the electric chair.
He was 16.
He's 16. But they still could have tried him as an adult. This is Virginia, and that was a black man. So, yeah, he would have gotten the chair. So he saved himself from the chair. But subsequently, they were all convicted. Now, Linwood and James, even Anthony, there was no remorse. And the police were just baffled because they're like, there was no way that they would have been able to connect any of these crimes because they picked random. There was no fixation on race, gender. There was no, it wasn't like it was age, because most of the people that they killed were elderly, women and men. So there was normally with serial killers, there's a pattern, what I mean? They have some sort of what they call pathology to say, these killers are doing this. There was no way to profile them because everything was just random. The robberies were random. It was completely by opportunity. So they're following the lady home from, Mary Gowan? They follow her home from a babysitting job. She was 76 years old. And then also the nurse, they followed her home from work. She was in her 50s. So Mary Wilfong. So there was no pattern for this.
They pulled the car over and whoever.
Yes.
I mean, you can see somebody just pull the car over.
Yeah, there was really no protection for the people of Richmond at that point because you didn't know where they were going to strike, when they were going to strike. in what neighborhood they were going to strike. So they didn't stick necessarily to their neighborhood. They were just all over the place in Richmond. Now, the way that the convictions go, let's see here. So Duncan confessed, ran down all the crimes. He's convicted, and he receives a life sentence plus 80 years. However, that still left him eligible for parole. He has been eligible for quite some time, but his parole gets denied every single time. There's been people who have rallied around him trying to, get him paroled because he helped get them convicted, but you're responsible for the death of Harvey Wilkerson and the sexual assault of his wife.
How long has he been in there so far now?
Since 1979.
Oh, yeah.
So we're working on what, 40 years? 41 years. Now also Anthony was convicted and given one life sentence with eligibility for parole. He is also still in prison. His eligibility is repeatedly denied, his parole. The reason why they gave Anthony one life sentence is because they really couldn't prove that he killed anybody. They just knew that he was there. So there was actually no proof that he committed, that he killed anybody, even though he did kill Judy Barton. Now for Linwood and James, they were both convicted on everything.
Oh, wow.
For the robberies, for all the murders. But the capital murder convictions came for Johnny Gallagher, Judy Barton, and Harvey Barton, which was the 5-year-old. So they were convicted of capital murder for those 3 deaths and given the death sentence. They were both, James and Linwood, sentenced to the Mecklenburg Correctional Center. Now, at the time, in 1979, Mecklenburg was supposed to have been the most advanced, secure, maximum security prison. It had all the bells and whistles for the time. That wasn't enough for these guys. While they were in prison, they're very charming, very intelligent. And I'll post one of, there's a conversation that Linwood has while he's in prison, very charismatic. So they basically have the guards in the prison working for them. They are the guards are smuggling drugs and weapons into the prison. So the Brileys have their own racketeering business while they're on death row.
And how are they even able to work together or do anything together?
Because they were on death row, and basically they talked the guards into it. So they have the guards working for them. And I don't know why they put them in the same prison.
Same prison, right.
Like, when you think about it, these guys feed off of each other. And so why would you put them in the same place? Because they are, even though Linwood is clearly a psychopath, you have them together. And they committed all their crimes together. And so it's like they're one unit. And then you put them in the same prison, in the same death row block together. And so they have a racketeering business. So in 1984, May 31st, 1984, they escaped death row. There were 4 other death row inmates who participated in this. And they were together. Wilbert Lee Evans, William, let's see here. What were the names of these guys? Willie Lloyd Turner, Lem Davis Tuggle, and
these names.
Yeah, and another guy. So they escape. Basically what they do is they get into one of the guard shacks, overpower the guards.
Maximum security.
Yes, in a maximum security prison. They fake a bomb threat. They put the uniforms on and they fake a bomb threat. Now, the way that the prison works was that none of the gates would be open at the same time. No two gates would be open at the same time. So it was always one gate open, closed, another gate open, closed. So you would never have just full access to anything. Well, because they faked a bomb threat, they took one of the TVs out of the break room, covered it with like a tarp or something to make it seem like this was the bomb. They carry it out. They convinced the guards outside that they have to open the gates at the same time to get this bomb out. They open the gates. The Brileys are gone. Gone. Off a death row cell block. The plan is to go to Canada. The 6 of them get as far as Philadelphia. The Brileys, at that point, when they reach Philly, break off from the other 4. The other 4 continue on to Vermont, where they are captured. The Brileys go back to Richmond and they hide in plain sight for about 19 days. Now they are in Richmond in their own damn neighborhood and they're living with their uncle for about 19 days.
Are they out in the neighborhood walking around?
Yes.
Well, folks was probably too scared to report them.
They have like names like Slim and something. So they like gave themselves some different names or whatever. But they're at their uncle's house. And on June 19th, 1984, FBI and everybody steps in and they are arrested. They're having a cookout and they're in the alley having a cookout at their uncle's house. Their uncle is arrested for, harboring fugitives and all of that. At that point, this is June 19th of 1984. All of their appeals are basically fast-tracked and denied. So they fast-track these appeals. Now, they've only been in prison for about 4 or 5 years at this point. They're fast-tracked. Now, October of 1984, October 12th, Linwood is executed by electric chair. So at this point, they ain't playing with these guys. So they electrocute him on October 12th. Now, one of the things that the lawyer said was that he went peacefully. She says, Deborah White, who was his attorney, says he made it a little easier on everyone by being exceedingly brave and he maintained his innocence. In one interview, in the jailhouse interview, brave. That's what she says. Exceedingly brave. But there's another report from one of the police officers investigators who went to the execution was like, he had to be dragged, bound and dragged to the chair. Like he was just, literally dragging his feet. So there's 2 conflicting accounts of how Linwood went to the chair. So he gets the chair. And then in April of 1985, James Jr., he's also executed by the electric chair. But again, Anthony Briley and Duncan Meekins are still in prison to this day, and it does not seem that they will be getting out ever. So when they leave that prison, it seems that they will be leaving in the back of a black hearse or a white one.
Did anybody did they ever talk to their mom and dad? I know you said they stayed with their uncle when they got out, but did their mom and dad ever say anything, or were they ever interviewed or anything like that?
Not that I was able to find. As far as their mom, it seems that she just exited stage left, like she was done, like she wanted nothing to do with them. You know what I mean? Like if my teenage sons can run me out of my house, then I don't necessarily want to be associated when they're adults and they commit a murder spree. Like at that point, I would think that she's pretty much through with them.
But Daddy, he hung on.
He did.
Apparently until they went to prison.
He did. Even during their crime spree, remember, he went to the police station with them. So, he was, with them until the very end. He also attended the executions of both of them. Let's see here. Oh, it does say that, let's see here. One of the brothers was visited by his mom. couple of days before the execution, and by his 10-year-old son. So they were actually they were both married. They both had kids.
The sons?
Yes, the Briley brothers, the two oldest ones.
Oh, that's kind of
They
hard.
were.
I mean, it's not hard to believe because a lot of serial killers end up having families, but that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. So he did have a son. I know that also James Jr. had a son as well, had children as well. So they were able to talk to, so before he died, he talked to Anthony and James before he was led to the death chamber. So yeah. So that's what happened. Now interesting enough, the house that they grew up on was at 3117 4th Avenue in Richmond. Their father, James Sr., sold that house in 2013. The guy who bought it had plans to kind of, renovate the house. It was a nice looking house. Normal neighborhood. It wasn't like a creepy, dilapidated house. You think that these serial killers grew up here. But he sold the house in 2013. The guy was going to rehab it and sell it. However, a news agency got a hold of the fact that the house was purchased and, released a little story. So the guy found out who lived there, and he no longer wanted to do anything with it. And he was trying to sell it. In 2014, he was actually trying to sell it for like $29,000, less than $30,000, just to get rid of it. I don't know what happened to it after that, but
I mean, they didn't do nothing to nobody in the house. What's the problem with the house? They only lived in it for a minute. Daddy lived in it the rest of
the
the time.
association. Like everyone in the neighborhood would have known that the Brileys used to live there, and so
Man,
unless you have like some like macabre person like myself, or someone who's like, I don't even care.
yeah, I don't care.
I'll live here. But just the association, because everyone in the neighborhood knew what happened, and Richmond, Virginia has never forgotten about the Brileys. So it is always, a stain on that community that the Brileys used to live there. So that's probably one of those houses where, on Halloween, the kids are like, don't go over to the Brileys. Don't, you don't want candy from over there.
But the only way to get over that is to go on and, don't let it be that symbol. Let somebody else take over, but that's just my opinion. I buy the house.
But I mean, you think about crimes that are committed, whether it's in the house or the murder or something that used to live there, you still have that stain in the curiosity and the fascination with. I mean, think about the DeMayo house in Amityville. Was like 1973 something, 76 or something, the Amityville horrors. The house is still there. He killed his parents and his three brothers, or 3 or 4 brothers and sisters, in that house. And every time they sell that house, something seems to happen. They've had the paranormal, all the Amityville horrors is based off of a family buying the house and living there and saying that all these bad things happen to them. Every time the house is sold, people flock to that house because they're so curious and so fascinated by the Amityville house. So you never lose that unless you bulldoze the property. And I don't know if that happened with the Briley's home, but the Amityville house is still there. There's, so there are certain homes in certain areas that are known for a particular crime, and they will always be known for a particular crime.
Yeah,
and people will always flock to those places.
I get it, but I'm just saying, ain't no way to clean the stain unless if the right price, your girl would be living up in the house.
Well, at the time in 2014, that house was being sold for about $30,000. So, and it was a nice row house in a very nice neighborhood. Even in 2014, it was still a nice neighborhood. But still that fascination there. The thing about the Brileys is that, one, they were actually brothers, and they seem to be working off of the same wavelength. They just moved seamlessly into crime and into murder, and there really wasn't any stopping them. Like they just kept doing things. And you can't really protect yourself against randomness and like that. You can't protect your community against complete randomness because you have no motive, and they just do things. There was neither one of the brothers was able to stop the other or wanted to stop the other, so they just kept killing and kept doing it, and the crimes got worse, and there was no conscience among any of them.
It was probably so random, you probably couldn't even profile. I mean,
no, they couldn't.
What kind of people would do that, or that it would be a sibling group and not a neighborhood gang or some kind of pair serial killers or something like that. You know, you don't think that some young kids that live in a normal neighborhood with two-parent homes out here pulling up on folks and busting in houses and kidnapping folks in trunks and stuff. That's just not normal. Like, how do you profile that?
They couldn't.
Normal,
one of the investigators,
in quotes, normal people.
Right. One of the investigators who had investigated the William and Virginia Butcher, the first crime that they committed when they set the house on fire, he was involved in that investigation, and they had nothing. So when he was also investigating the other crimes, like he's like the investigator involved in most of these crimes. He's not able to put them together because
these guys didn't even kind of like try to clean their tracks. They're just doing it and just didn't leave any evidence behind. Or were they trying not to, like, wiping stuff down, or they was just going in doing it and they just happened not to leave anything behind or any evidence? And
right. So it wasn't a plan to say, okay, we're going to do this and no, it was just, we're going to go in here, we're going to rob. And if, we're going to kill them. And if they die, they die. And the brutality in which they did these things. I mean, you're killing people with baseball bats and bludgeoning them to death, dropping the cinder block on Christopher Phillips'
head.
And
personal.
Right. And it's all overkill. It's not a single thing. It's all overkill. So each crime scene was horrific. It wasn't just, we need to kill him so we can get out of here. It was overkill, as if they took pleasure in doing this, and they really did. The fact that they were committing these things together and bonding over this. There's a word that called homoeroticism, where basically it's a group arousal thing, not in any sick sexual thing, but it is a group arousal that you're committing something together and everyone is able to receive the same pleasure from just being in the same room committing a crime, or being something, things like
just
that.
Hanging out, in their case, just hanging out with your siblings, game night,
and committing these crimes together. So they are getting this group pleasure off of this. And so the worse the crime is and the more brutal the crime is, the more pleasure that they get, and they're getting a high off of it. And I just, you just imagine, like, if they weren't caught, if they had not killed the Wilkersons, I don't think they would have been caught that soon, because they knew the Wilkersons and the cops knew they knew the Wilkersons and they'd seen them in the area. So
and they would have seen the ring.
Right, in the ring. But the ring, they didn't know about the ring until they were arrested. So the ring, the only reason that they knew about that ring is because Linwood was wearing that ring when they were arrested.
I'm saying, if they hadn't thought about them with the Wilkersons, they would have never brought them in and been able to connect the other crimes.
Exactly.
They just went down for the Wilkersons, but not everybody else.
Right. So those are the Briley brothers: Linwood Earl, James Jr., and Anthony Briley, along with Duncan Meekins, who reigned hell over Richmond for about 7 months in 1979. So I'll be surprised to find another sibling pair or sibling group that does that. It's very rare that you'll have sibling groups that commit murders together. Now, you have had siblings who commit separate crimes, but together like that in like this seamless single entity type thing, it's very rare that you see that.
Except for those two sisters, the twin sisters with their mama. Remember them?
Oh, what was that? In Florida?
Yeah, the two twin sisters.
Yeah, that was yeah. I'll bring that up. I will bring that up because that was crazy reading that about those sisters who, but that was a single crime, so it wasn't like
Well, it
serial
wasn't a
crime.
spree. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a
You're
single
still
crime. So
crazy though.
it's still crazy. You will have pairs who do things in a single crime, but this was a serial murder spree. So that's, you know, much different than a single crime. Still crazy, still brutal, but the single crimes. So that is our show for this week. I do want to thank our guest host on location for joining in. So thank you, Brandy, for joining us this week.
No problem.
And adding your input. So we will see you next week, next Thursday at 7 p.m. on Instagram and on Facebook for another show. And we will announce the subject on Monday about what we're going to talk about on next week. So again, thank you for joining us. Be safe, be blessed, and of course, enjoy that second cup. So good night, Brandy, and good night,
Good night.
y'all.